A senior member of Donald Trump's cabinet stood in front of a microphone in Washington last week. He was asked a simple question about Canada. Instead of answering, he said two words out loud that nobody at his level is supposed to say in public. They suck. Not Iran, not China, not Russia, Canada, America's longest peaceful neighbor, the country sharing the longest undefended border on planet Earth. The country whose prime minister was, 2 weeks earlier, sitting across from him in a negotiating room. And here's the part that should really worry Washington. Canadians weren't insulted. They were happy. I'll explain why in a second. But first, if you actually want to understand who's winning this trade war right now and why the most powerful economy in human history just lost its temper on a stage, stay with me. Because by the end of this video, you're going to see something almost nobody on American television is willing to say out loud. The country with all the cards isn't the one you think it is. I'm not exaggerating when I tell you the entire mood of this trade war shifted in the last 7 days. So let's actually unpack what happened, because the story isn't the insult. The story is why the insult happened. Rewind to April 17th. Howard Lutnick, the U.S. Commerce Secretary, sits down at the Semaphore World Economy Summit in Washington. The interviewer reads him a quote from Steve Verhoeven, Canada's former chief trade negotiator, the man who literally helped write the agreement they're about to renegotiate. Verheugen's argument was simple. He said, "Time is on Canada's side. The longer this drags on, the worse the political pressure gets on Trump from American businesses, American farmers, American consumers. Just wait. Don't rush." Lutnick exploded. He called it the worst strategy he'd ever heard. Then he turned to the audience and dropped those two words. Then he didn't stop. He mocked Mark Carney's trip to Beijing. He sneered at Canada's deal to import Chinese electric vehicles. He said, and I want you to really hear this, "We are a $30 trillion economy. We are the consumer of the world." That sentence, that is the whole story. Because what Lutnick was really saying, without realizing he was saying it, is that America's only remaining argument in this trade war is the size of its wallet, not the quality of its products, not the strength of its alliances, not the rule of law, just we are bigger than you. And here's why that argument is collapsing in real time. Mark Carney spent his first year in office doing something no Canadian Prime Minister has done in living memory. He got on a plane 26 times. He flew to Beijing. He flew to New Delhi. He flew to Tokyo, to Sydney, to Jakarta, to London. And in each of those capitals, he made the same quiet pitch. Canada is open for business with the world, just maybe not as open with the country to the south. In January, Carney signed a limited trade pact with China, cutting tariffs on canola oil and electric vehicles. In Indonesia, he signed a comprehensive economic partnership that, when ratified, will eliminate tariffs on roughly 95% of Canadian exports: wood, wheat, potash, soybeans. In Tokyo, he laid the groundwork to ship Alberta liquefied natural gas directly to Japan, bypassing American infrastructure entirely. The European Union signed a free trade deal with India in January. Britain's Prime Minister Keir Starmer flew to Beijing the day after Carney left. A pattern is forming, and it has a name. Diplomats call it hedging. Carney himself called it something more direct at the Davos Forum in January. He said America's allies need to diversify to hedge against uncertainty, diversify away from a country that has become unpredictable. Now think back to Lutnick. We are the consumer of the world. That used to be a statement of fact. Today it sounds like a man trying to convince himself. This is why Verheugen said time is on Canada's side. Because every month this drags on, more orders shift to Mexico, more contracts shift to Europe, more supply chains shift to Asia, and every month, the political cost in the United States climbs higher. 43% of New Hampshire's tourists were Canadian. They've collapsed by 30% in a year. Senator Jeanne Shaheen grilled Lutnick about it on live television. A New York congressman, Joseph Morell, told Lutnick to his face that a manufacturer in his own district had decided it was now cheaper to expand a factory in Berlin than in Rochester because of these tariffs. Lutnick had no answer. He pivoted to talking points about reshoring. That's a tell. When a commerce secretary can't answer a Republican-friendly question about American jobs, the policy is failing. And there's one more number from that hearing room nobody is talking about. According to fresh data from Statistics Canada, released the same day Lutnick testified, Canadian return trips from the United States dropped another 12.5% in February alone, compared to a year earlier. Meanwhile, Canadian travel to overseas destinations rose nearly 7%. Read that slowly. Canadians aren't just avoiding America, they're rerouting their vacations, their honeymoons, their family trips to Europe, to Asia, to anywhere that isn't south of the border. That isn't a boycott anymore. That's a habit forming. And habits, once they set, don't reverse with a press release. Now here's where the story gets really interesting because there's a second front in this war, and Washington is about to discover it the hard way. Dairy. You probably saw a flash of this in headlines. The U.S. has been demanding access to Canada's roughly $20 billion dairy market for years. Trump has made it personal, repeatedly attacking Canada's supply management system, the policy that protects Canadian dairy farmers from being wiped out by cheap American milk. Last summer, the U.S. International Trade Commission launched a formal probe accusing Canada of dumping cheap milk powder and whey protein on the American market. The findings landed in March 2026, 3 months before the CUSMA renegotiation begins. Trump's team thought they had a smoking gun. Their plan was simple: take the probe to the table, point at it, and demand Canada open its dairy market. Then they hit a wall they didn't know existed: Bill C-202. In June 2025, Canada's Parliament passed a law that does something quietly extraordinary. It legally prohibits the federal government from offering any further dairy concessions in trade negotiations. It's not a position, it's not a guideline, it's a statute. Dominic LeBlanc, Canada's trade minister, has now said publicly multiple times that supply management is off the table. And he's not posturing, he literally cannot offer it. The law has tied his hands. And that was the point. Read what just happened there. Canada looked at the renegotiation, predicted exactly which lever Washington would try to pull, and welded it shut before the talks even started. This is not the country the United States thinks it's negotiating with anymore. And the U.S. Trade Representative, Jamieson Greer, Lutnick's colleague, said something this week that deserves more attention than it got. He told a House committee that Canada and the U.S. now have, quote, two trade philosophies that don't fit together very well. He accused Canada of doubling down on globalization while we're trying to correct for it. Pause on that. An American trade official just publicly admitted that Canada is heading in the opposite direction. He said it with frustration. He should have said it with alarm, because what Greer described isn't a dispute. It's a divorce. So put the pieces on the table together. Lutnick lost his temper because the American leverage isn't working. Greer admitted the two countries are no longer aligned. Carney has built trade bridges to 4 other continents. The dairy lever is legally welded shut. The liquor shelves are still empty. Tourism is collapsing. American manufacturers are quietly moving production to Germany. And the renegotiation hasn't even formally started yet. This is what people mean when they say a hegemon is in decline. It's not a single dramatic moment. It's a senior cabinet member saying they suck on a stage in a country smiling because the insult is the proof. Here's the line I want you to remember. For 90 years, the unspoken rule of the Canada-US relationship was simple. America led. Canada followed politely. Mark Carney, very calmly, very methodically, has erased that rule. And he hasn't done it with a speech. He's done it with 26 plane rides, 1 law about milk, and the patience to wait while the other side runs out of arguments. The CUSMA review begins this summer. The U.S. came in expecting to dictate terms. They're about to discover that the country across the table now has options, real ones, and isn't in a hurry anymore. Time, as Verheul said, is on Canada's side.